Good evening, everyone. My name is Benedict Lecca, Executive Director of the Redwood Library, and I want to welcome you this evening to our talk. A very special talk because we are very pleased the Tree Conservancy, which is making an invaluable impact on our city, preserving its rich green history. And those two trees out front, boy, I'm grateful they're paying attention. We had the Bartlett people come out recently and have a look and recable them and all that. Because anyway, so it's executive directorist Trees of Newport, Fernleaf Beech a moment ago. We'll even have a demonstration of grafting for you tree lovers interested in grafting. And if you have any questions, please post them on the right-hand side of your screen that you'll see there. Some people have already posted stuff, and we'll answer them at the conclusion. I just want to make one last technical comment up on the upper right at the help question mark. If you have any issues with sound, you can click on there and hit the compatibility button, and somehow, often, but not always, alas, that solves the issues. So without further ado, I want to welcome Natasha Harrison of the Newport Tree Conservancy.
Hi, thanks so much, Benedict, for your intro.
Welcome, everyone.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing. So if you guys didn't hear, I'm Natasha Harrison. I'm the Executive Director of the Newport Tree Conservancy. We're a nonprofit organization here in Newport, Rhode Island. We were founded in 1987 by some concerned citizens who are still involved to this day, who are concerned about the trees in our city, preserving the lineage, making sure we're planting trees, and paying attention to our urban forest and our tree canopy. Go ahead. So the organization has a few things that we do. Number one, we plant trees in the city. All of the trees that are planted in public spaces in Newport are paid for by the Newport Tree Conservancy because the city doesn't have a line item for their budget for trees. So we do a lot of fundraising, and we do a lot of selecting trees depending upon what application it's for, whether it's a bare root or whether we're trying to diversify species in Newport. The other thing that we're doing is we're in every single school in the public school system in Newport. We're inspiring and educating the next generation. And this picture here is a group of students from Rogers High School standing underneath the Redwood Library Fernleaf Beech with a specimen of a grafted tree from that Fernleaf Beech. And that's what you're going to see today is Nick is going to actually do that process of grafting a scion from the Fernleaf Beech at the Redwood, and you'll be able to see that in action. We have a facility up on Rogers High School property. We call it the Tree House. It sits on our little plot of land that's our Heritage Tree Center, and that is where the historic trees that we're replicating live. We are taking trees from some of the most historic spots in Newport, the Redwood Library, of course, several of the Preservation Society properties, the Newport Art Museum, other properties that are private around the city are kind enough to let us come and take cuttings from their trees so that when the parent tree passes, we will have an identical DNA plant to replace that tree. They're not trees that you can go out and buy at Home Depot. You have to be very careful about how you propagate them, and we've been fortunate that we have Nick Castrataro, our horticulturist, who's been very successful. So this is the inside of the treehouse with some of the specimens that we've been growing. Some are small, as you can see in the front, and we've been doing it for about 3 years now, so we have a couple of specimens that are getting larger, and this year we've done another 110 more trees. Of course, we won't have living specimens from each of those, but we do a lot of them in order to get some that will take. And this is a shot of some of our students and teachers and friends in our tree house. So it is available to visit. We love to have visitors in the summer. If you're in Newport or if you're from Newport, you can get in touch with us, come for a visit and see all of the trees that we've been propagating up there. We also have volunteer opportunities. We are taking over the tree care of all of the young trees planted in Newport in public spaces. And we have a great sign up system. So if you would like to help us watering and mulching and caring for the trees that are for all of us, you can sign up at our website, newporttreeconservancy.org. So that is all from me. I'm honored to introduce to you Nick Castrataro, who is our horticulturist. He's been here for a couple of years. He's done a lot of great work, and this is his last day. So you're a very fortunate audience to be able to see his presentation and learn from him, because he is an expert at grafting and an expert plantsman and horticulturist. So I will now give you Nick.
So, hello everybody. I think we'll just keep with the PowerPoint, and I can introduce myself later, just to make things simplified with where we're working here. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing, why we're doing, how we're preserving it. I know Natasha gave a kind of a quick overview of why we're doing it, but hopefully you guys can see we have the beech on the screen. And what we're talking about is we are talking about the Fernleaf Beech in front of the library. So it's a green beech, and if the audience is familiar with Newport, you know that there's all kinds of old beeches around the city. There's copper beech and Fernleaf beech and weeping beech, and the beech that's in front of the Redwood and the Athenæum is actually a Fernleaf beech. And I've got a little bit of a little history on the tree, but most notably is this is the tree on Bellevue that's growing around the fence. A lot of times people don't realize that this is the redwood tree, but they do remember that tree growing around the fence, and that's perfectly fine for the tree. The way trees growing around a fence pole isn't really a big deal. So it's kind of fun. If you are not familiar with the tree itself, if you're ever in Newport, this is definitely a fun one to go see. So, a little brief notation on beeches, what we're doing, and some varieties. So what we're doing is we're grafting a variety of the trait species of European beech. Hopefully you guys can see my pointer, and on the left here is kind of what a straight European beech looks like. We have our beech nuts. We see we have green round leaves. The margin is a little bit undulate. If you were to look really closely, you'd see it's really fuzzy or hairy, which is kind of a good way to differentiate it from our native beech. And then the desired tree on the right is a fernleaf beech. And we call this Vega sylvatica esplenifolia because it has really cool leaves. It's really dissected at the margins. The term for it is lacinate. And there's a few varieties. If you really want to get into a horticulture argument, start discussing the different varieties and how similar and different they are. But the one cool thing that makes this esplenifolia is if you look at the photo on the right side of your screen, you'll see these really thin lanceolate leaves, and that's a real characteristic of Fernleaf Beech or esplenifolia. And again, the variety was released in 1804 over in England because this is a European tree. And they found, there's a lot of diversity of trees over in Europe. And somebody found either a whole tree that had some dissected leaves or just a branch, and they knew that they could propagate it. So kind of a brief introduction of, what we're talking about when we talk about for varieties. So we have a little bit of a history on this tree. There's a lot of history in Newport. We do know some stories of the old trees, some of them we don't. But fortunately, we do have history of this particular tree in front of the library. And this tree traveled from England with Robert Johnston in 1835. And it was, back in the day, they didn't have planes, so it came across by steamship. And one thing that we know about beech trees is the varieties is this had to come over as a live tree. You would not have been able to bring over a seedling because this variety doesn't come true from seed. So you could take the beech nuts off the tree in the front of the redwood, and you could, sow them and get them imbibed and grow, and you might have some dissected leaves, but a majority of them are just going to have those round leaves. So, we're kind of have to propagate these vegetatively in one form or another. And so what we're doing is grafting. So we're pretty sure that this tree is roughly 185, 190 years old, depending on how old it was. I doubt he brought over a large tree by steamship back in the early 1800s. And if you see the photo on the right there, you'll actually see this is me holding up our year number 1 of this program. That tree, the graft union of that tree lines up with the graft union on the other tree. And, if you look closely, you'll see that line right there. That is held up right where that is. So hopefully in 186 years, when this tree is still alive, big and beautiful, we'll see that line right there. So I'm going to describe a little bit of that later. So, we call this the preservation process. What are we doing? We're growing new trees. The easy way to, preserve this genome, we do our best to try and keep the tree alive, but trees are like people too, unfortunately they're living beings. They do get old and they succumb to disease. Unfortunately, there's a really prolific disease that's taking out a lot of the beech trees in town because they're old. Young trees don't really have an issue with that disease. It's a Phytophthora, but the older trees do. So the good news is the tree in front of the library is still in remarkably good shape. There's good vigor, so they're not to worry about it. But one way we can preserve that line is we can graft it for the future. So a couple photos I have, just some basic, some kind of when I'm working, what it looks like. And then we have a peek inside our grafting tent. This was last year. This was one of last year's crops. This is kind of what the tree looks like when it first roots out. And I'll go over a little bit why it looks the way it does. So, some basic terminology when we're talking about grafting. We usually talk about the scion and the rootstock. The scion is essentially the parent material that we collect off the parent tree. So the scions are the twigs that I pull off the tree in front of the redwood. So I did all my grafting a couple weeks ago. I went out there. If anybody was out there seeing some guy staring up in the tree for an hour with a long stick, that was me collecting scions. And you can see I have them bagged to the left. You'll see that I have different groupings because we work with a bunch of the older trees around town. So trees that have historical significance, they're our heritage trees. That's why we named our Heritage Tree Center after them. On the right is the rootstock. Now, there's all kinds of grafting, and you can graft branches on the mature trees, but for all intents and purposes, we're talking about grafting to create new trees. So we're using rootstock, which are our seedling donors. So you can see in here on the right, here are our seedlings in a greenhouse. We force these a little early. We like our rootstocks to be active. We like our scions to be dormant. And there's a lot of biochemical reasons why we do that, but we like active bottoms and dormant tops because we really like those rootstocks actively growing, moving, pushing water. The bark softens up. Whereas at the same time, the way we graft here in New England, we bench graft inside, is we need those scions dormant because I can't have leaves transpiring because there's no root system on there. So the only way we can really put water into a plant is through a root system. So when we're propagating it, we really need to manage water loss. And so an easy way to do that is to use dormant material. And there's also some plant hormones in play that are stored in dormant stock. So that's why we like that material. So when we're talking grafting, the big thing that we're really, really concerned with is the graft union. So the union is where the rubber meets the road or the scion meets the rootstock. So I have a couple old unions here. This beech here happens to be one of the beech trees in front of the library. I mean, not the library, the post office here in town. That tree has a really neat story. If you would actually pay attention to it in the summer, you'd see something peculiar about it. we come over here to the tree all the way on the right, and this is weeping beech at an estate over in Middletown, and this is one of the coolest weepers that I know. And what we're seeing is we're seeing the scion overgrowing the rootstock. So we don't have that nice clear line that we see with the Fernleaf Beech that I showed you a couple slides ago. But these trees are healthy. The rootstock is growing a little slower than the scion, but that's okay. I mean, these trees are probably 80 to 100 years old. It may lead to a failure down the line, but it's nothing I'd be really super concerned about. Now, the photo in the middle, this is what we're doing. This is in the grafting tent. This is probably 3 weeks after I grafted. We can see the scion is this little skinny part right here. This is going to be the new beech tree at the top. This is the rootstock here. There's a little bit of a size difference, but that's not really concerning. And when we kind of get into it, I'll talk about the reasons why. But we can see the scion, the rootstock. We have our grafting rubber bands here. And you can see this little white bubbling here. This is what we call callus. This is kind of the magic. When I see callus happening in a graft union, I know we've got something really good going on. We're seeing callus. It's that white, soft tissue. It's cells. It's rapid cell division. This means something's happening. This is like when you cut your finger and it starts to heal. This is that good stuff you want to see when it's not just the scab, but it's actually your skin growing back. So that's what we call callus. Some basic tools. What we have. All right, we have our grafting knife. When we're grafting in production-wise, you can graft with something as simple as a razor blade, but we like our single bevel sharp knife. We like a flat knife. So one side's flat, the other side has all the bevel on it. So it looks more like a chisel than, say, your traditional knife. And there are reasons for that, is we don't want to cut too deep. And we use that bevel to kind of move some material around. And I'm going to do a demo when I'm done with this, and you guys hopefully can see what I'm doing. But I do have these slides to try and get a little bit closer up of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and kind of go into the background. Grafting rubbers, and the knife is really sharp. I mean, we want really sharp knives because we're using a knife in wood. So the sharper, the better. Grafting rubbers are essentially just a rubber band. It's not the circular rubber band. It's a rubber band that's been cut. And we use that because we really want to squeeze stuff together. Back in the day, they used to use wax string. The rubber bands really help hold things together. When I talk to people about grafting and they've tried it and they've had some failure, the rubber band makes up for a lot of inconsistencies with your cuts. And so I can't stress enough the grafting rubbers. Pruners, collecting and prepping science for the grafting process. If you see my photo up here, I've got the small hand pruners for fine work. And then I have my big pole pruner up here. That's what I'm using to actually collect the science with, because I am trying to source material from trees. And, the higher up I can kind of go and find really good vigor, or the better material, the long internodes, nice and thick, lots of sun, lots of sugar. We really want that good vigor growth, because that's going to really have a lot of stuff in the science stored that's going to be ready for the processes that we're doing, because we really want cell division, metabolism, all that good stuff going on. So we really want to get that good vigorous material. Labels, I'm a stickler for labels. I can't tell you how many times, I am in production, and, a plant without a label is not really useful if I don't know what it is. So really, everybody that knows me knows that I'm a little bit of a stickler when it comes to labeling things, just because, this year alone, we grafted 6 different varieties of beeches. 3 of them were the same variety, but they were different trees. We grafted 3 different Fernleaf Beech. We did the one in front of the library. We did the Liberty tree because it has a historical significance. And then there's a really spectacular specimen at Chepstow, which is one of the preservation properties. So we're grafting all different kinds of trees. And then parafilm and grafting wax. Because I'm doing enough trees, I use a humidity tent. But if I'm only doing 1 or 2, I'm probably going to want to wrap it in parafilm, or at the least, I like to use a 5-gallon bucket with a trash bag. And that's a lot of times has been my humidity tent when I'm doing it in an area where I don't have a nice warm greenhouse. So those are the basic tools. And environment, environment's really key. I think a lot of times when people have problem with grafting is they're not having that really good controlled environment. So like I mentioned earlier, we use a grafting tent. I use moist peat moss. It's wet enough where if you pick it up, it doesn't drip water. You really have to squeeze it. If you squeeze it with all your might, you start dripping water out, that's good. It's always a balance. Too much, things rot, not enough, they dry out. So we use that moist peat moss. I use heating mats underneath. I like around 75 degrees because, I want the temperature. I don't want the tops necessarily warm, but I do want where the graft happened to be a nice warm temperature because, metabolism up to a certain point gets heated, increases with temperature. So 75 degrees is really good. So I use that nice warm peat moss to keep the unions moist and to keep them warm. So you can see over here, if you can see my pointer, you can see the little rubber bands and where my associate, Kristen Woodward, is packing a tent. We're putting the pots down and then we're putting the peat moss just to cover that graft union. Because I really want that heat and that humidity right at that union. Because if that union dries out, then I've just wasted my time. So the graft itself, what I'm using, and again, with a lot of things, there's a lot of different ways to do it, kind of based on where you are in the country or what you're grafting. There's all different kinds of grafts. There's an old grafting handbook, grafter's handbook. I don't think it's in publication anymore, and it's if you're really into the old books and you find it in a bookstore, it's really neat. And it just has lots and lots of different types of grafts. So what we kind of traditionally use here in Rhode Island is what we use what we call a modified side veneer graft, where we're literally taking a veneer and we're sticking it together and we're using it that way. So if you see my drawing in the middle, we have our rootstock, we have our scion, and we have this little flap. So this is a cut that we make, and I'm going to go over all of this when I'm doing it, but I like to have drawings because it's probably going to be hard for everybody to see exactly what I'm doing up close. So we literally take our scion, we have a nice little angled cut, we have a couple wounds on our scion, and we have our one wound on our rootstock, and what we're doing is we're literally veneering that scion onto that rootstock. So the couple photos I have, we can see where we kind of just literally cleaved it off a little. The one on the left probably isn't one of my best grafts, but I liked it because it shows the callus and the healing happening. And then we come over here to the right, and we can see up a little closer, we see the little bit of a flap pulled off. The flap is kind of window dressing. And this is also why we call it modified, because in a lot of parts of the country, they just cut that flap right off and they don't worry about it. But I like it because it kind of helps tie everything together, and it also helps hold that humidity in where the wounds are. So that's what that photo is. So how it works, so we are again to my wonderful little drawings. This is what you can't see. And when I teach people how to graft, I'm like, look, you can see where the bark goes to the phloem, to the cambium, to the xylem, and everybody, just shakes their head. Yeah, it's there. I can see it. I can barely see it, and I'm doing it. So that's kind of why I have this here. So what we're doing is we're making cuts, and we're looking in the windows. And so these windows, looks kind of like a cute little church window. When I make a cut with a knife and I cut down and I peel the bark back, this is kind of what we see. And we have layers. So we have the bark, which is the outer protective layer. We have our phloem cells, which are the cells in plants, and this is literally right underneath the bark. Now, when you girdle a tree or you tie a cable around it, you can kill it. Then what happens is it grows and it literally strangles itself because all the good stuff, that the living material of that tree is right on the inside of the bark. Just like if you were to take a knife and carve completely around a tree, a 1-inch band, you've essentially killed that tree because all the sugar and water is all happening right at that bark layer. The inside, the middle of the tree is actually dead. It's dead xylem. I'm calling this pith or heartwood here. When you see those pretty patterns, these are the cells or the bands in the tree that make those wonderful layers that when you're a little kid and you cut down a tree and you can count the layers. that's every year's worth of the cambium produced in the phloem and the xylem. So the phloem is the sugar. Phloem will move in two directions. Trees will move their carbohydrates up, then they'll move them down. In the spring they move them up out to the buds. In the summer, when the leaves are green and growing, they'll move it down. And then we have the cambium. Well, the cambium is that layer where new cells are produced. So we have apical meristems, which is where all of how trees grow. They grow from meristems. So apical meristems are on the tips, and they're sending the branches out. Well, the cambium is the meristem in the middle that's producing the caliper of the tree, and that's sticking xylem in, and it's shooting phloem off, and it's pulling bark off. So that's what we're looking at here. So the drawing all the way on the left is the rootstock. The drawing in the middle is the sign. So that's why they look a little different. There's nothing on the sign because we've cut the bottom off. So we have the same kind of wounds. And then the drawing on the right is the alignment. And if you're looking at it, you can kind of see that window is cut in half. Well, it's very, very rare that the sign and the rootstock, when you make the wounds, are going to be exactly the same. So as grafters, we only care about that. We only care about one side. If you just stick that sign right in the middle of the rootstock, I can almost guarantee that you haven't lined anything up. Now, if you favor one side or the other side, and it doesn't matter whether you do left or right. When I'm grafting, I'm usually doing the left side because I'm right-handed, and that's what I can see. So I always favor the left side. I don't care about the right side. If I make both line up, that's great. But if I make it a point to try and have both sides line up, I'd split the difference and I've gained absolutely nothing. So you can see here, I have the rootstock and the sign's kind of there, and this is the back side of it. So that's what that diagram is supposed to kind of represent. And so here are just some basic photos. I'm going to actually go through the process. But over here, we're prepping the sign. We're making our cuts. We're cutting both sides. I am cutting towards myself. That usually scares a lot of people. I've taught grafting, and everybody always freaks out about cutting towards themselves because I know the rest of the world, particularly the Boy Scouts, says never cut towards yourself with a knife. Well, I don't really have the control that I want to make my cuts because I'm really dealing with small stuff. So I'm cutting towards myself. And I'll show you all of this when I'm actually doing it. And hopefully Rachel can catch some of this when she's filming me, our program coordinator, Rachel. You can see over here on the right, I've kind of made my cut on the rootstock, and I'm peeling that little flat back. Now that one-sided knife, the flat side is running really tight onto whatever I'm cutting. And wrapping. So this is where I make the union. I take my scions and I take my rootstock, and I'm literally fetching them up and lining them together. So on the left here, I've made my cuts, and I'm taking my I'm taking my scion and I'm wedging it in. I've got the little flap pulled back, and down here in this photo, you can see I have them together. I'm looking to make sure that left side, I can't see any white. White is bad. White means I have gaps. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for bark-to-bark contact, where I know those wounds are in there. And if I could see bark-to-bark, then I know that I have a good attachment, and I'm pretty sure that my cambium on both is going to line up. So when we're doing this grafting, I only care about literally 4 cells. I care about 1 phloem and 1 xylem of the scion, and 1 phloem and 1 xylem of the rootstock lining up. And everything else, if I get them to go, that's great. But if I don't have at least those 4 cells in the right positions, then I just wasted my time and resources. So over here in the middle, you can see I'm wrapping the rubber bands, and I'm squeezing them together. I'm checking. I'm wrapping around with the rubber bands, and then I'm finishing off with a knot. I'm pulling these pretty tight. And this is another thing that when I'm teaching somebody, they really struggle with the wrapping. You guys, I don't know if you can tell from the photo, but everybody says, it's so fine, whatever. I don't know how you do it, because I literally have sausage fingers, and if I can do it, there really shouldn't be an excuse for somebody else. I mean, it's really not bad. And again, you got to do it and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And I know it's that whole practice makes perfect, and people give you a look when you say that, but that's kind of what we're dealing with there. So here are kind of our finished or our taken grafts. We always say, did it take? Did it not take? So we kind of use taken a lot in production. So these are plants that these are plants that have taken. So the photo over here, when they take, as you can see the photo over here on the right, now what we do is we come in and we literally cut the top off that rootstock. That rootstock has done its job. It is no longer worth anything to me. So I'll come in here with my pruners and I'll cut the tops off. And you can see right here where I've cut the rootstock off. So I have the rootstock, I have my scion. When they're little, they look kind of funny. You know, it's kind of like a puppy with big paws. You know, it'll grow into it over time. It heals. And in my next slide, we'll kind of see how that goes. So this photo in the middle, we can kind of see the grafting rubber band, and we can see that wonderful callus formation. You know, that's the gold we want to see. So I have callus here, and in this photo here, I have some callus. And then this photo up here this is actually this isn't a beech, this is the beautiful Camperdown elms that we have in Eisenhower Park that we're also working with. These are you know, we've grafted these, and this is kind of, you know, right now it's a fun time to be in the tent to see the leaves come out. You're like, oh, I think it's going to go, but there's no guarantee that this will take. I know this one did take because we have the tree, but the leaves will come out, and sometimes you'll get some false hopes. It's not until you really see new stems elongating, you really see that good callus right there. Because a lot of people, you know, if you're kind of like, you know, a lot of people like to take forsythia branches this time of year. You cut them outside, you bring them in the house, you stick them in a glass of water, well, the flowers open up. You know, that plant's going to be alive until, you know, the sugar really runs out of that. So we'll start to see this even in the grafting tent. I know everybody always gets excited, but it's like, all right, let's give them a couple weeks because hopefully it goes. If the buds don't open, then you know it didn't work. But this is at least what we're looking for. So kind of my second to last final slide. This is, you know, this is what we're looking at. This is what we're dealing with. You know, you know, we have our first spring. This is a weeping beech over here on the left that we did out of one of these states here. Gorgeous tree. The thing looks like a dinosaur. It's layered in. There's stems coming out all over the place. You know, once the weeping part of the stem hits the ground, it'll grow its own roots. And you know, that's kind of another topic as to how, you know, how that happened. But you can see we have the cut, we have the wound from this year. So this is the spring. This is literally probably about 2 weeks after I took it out of the grafting tent. I had cut off the rootstocks. You're seeing the sign on the rootstock. This is another tree from that grouping, that first fall. So this has gone through, you know, spring, summer, this is fall, this is kind of towards, you know, the end of the summer, the beginning of the fall. We can see that wound. So we see our rootstock here, we see a little bit of scion here, and we can see that rootstock flap right here on the outside. And you can actually see the indentations from the grafting rubber where the callus kind of bubbled over, and you know, that's what that creamy white callus looked like in the slide before. That's what it turns into. And then over here, this year, this is we started doing this program in 2019. This is one of the first trees that we did. So this is I literally snapped this photo today of this tree in our tree house, and this is what the room looks like after 3 years. And you can see that the scion's kind of starting to go over it. And as this tree gets older and older, you'll lose that. In the trade, we kind of call that the dog leg. You know, as the tree grows, I have it staked. You know, we stake it nice and straight. As this tree grows, that dog leg will go away, and you won't even know it. And hopefully, you know, if the grafter, hopefully myself, did a good job, then you'll just see that thin little slice. So this tree here on the right is one of the first trees that we did for the redwood that we did in 2019. So this is the tree. This is what it looks like in 4 years, and hopefully, you know, in another 2-3 years, this will be big enough that we could actually plant maybe, you know, at the redwood, and this will be the redwood fernleaf junior. And this came directly from that tree. This isn't one we just bought in that might have a slightly different genome from a different tree. I mean, this 1835 tree is about as close as you get to the original fernleaf that was released in 1804. You know, because even though we're cloning, you know, stuff does change over time, just like kind of like we're dealing with now. Even though you're doing exact replications, just DNA changes. Just it's the way it works in replication. So I've got this last slide here, and this is just kind of a segue into us actually grafting. And this is just some really cool trees around town. The tree on the left, this is a pair of, I showed you this earlier, this is a pair of weeping trees from an estate over in Middletown. And this is the little, I could tell this is Middletown right on the ocean because this is one of the old little smuggler's notches that it's like a bunch of tunnels underneath on that side from back in the day. And this is inside, I love when I see a big tree to kind of get in the canopy and see what it looks like. And this looks like one giant tree, and it's actually two. And this is that Graft Union. And it looks ugly. I think it looks cool. Most people thinks it looks cool. But, there is some little bit of a graft incompatibility. But the tree's happy. It's healthy. I wouldn't do anything about it. This here tree, this is actually the Redwood tree. If you're actually staring up at the Redwood tree, at one point somebody trimmed it to keep a couple of the leaders from splitting. So I see all kinds of cabling and bracing in trees. I kind of find it fascinating that your tree up there, pre-slavery, has its own chains to this day holding it together. It's the first chain I've seen holding the tree together. And then this other little oddity on the right here, this is actually the tree in front of the post office. And if you haven't done so yet, we have our Tree of the Week series at the Newport Tree Conservancy, where I go and I pick a tree around town, and I usually try and tell a little bit of a story about it. My predecessor's gonna keep going with this, and this is kind of a fun tree where this is actually a beech tree that is a copper beech and a weeping beech all at the same time. And I'm not going to go into it now because we don't have a lot of time, but if you go on our website, I kind of have a whole write-up of how I think this probably came about. So that's it for the presentation. I'm gonna kind of turn my volume down. I'm gonna move over, and you guys can see me in action. And I am gonna be showing you guys how we do this. I'll take my time. Hopefully, we can get some close-up shots as to how we do it, and then we'll have a little question and answer after the fact. So I'm gonna stop sharing. And then we hopefully will switch over to Rachel.
So, hello everybody again. And I don't think it's really all that necessary to see my face as long as we can kind of see where my hands are. So you want to pan down a little. Perfect. All right, so here I am again, headless, but that's okay.
So in front of us, we have our rootstocks in our nifty little Newport Tree Conservancy pots. And these are active. It doesn't look like this is right because I have had these in the greenhouse for a few weeks. They're a little slow to wake up, but I know that they're active. So they're softer, water is moving up and down, sugar is moving up and down. I have my signs that are collected from the actual tree of the redwood.
This is pretty simple. This is what it looks like. These are the same species.
When we're grafting, it really is species dependent. Some plants you can get away with different species, different genera. Some as long as they're the same family, they're pretty good. But this kind of all goes back to the basic plant anatomy and botany and biochemistry and what can get wrong. One of my favorite things when I'm teaching somebody about plants is plant ID, because you gotta know what you're working with in order to work. So we have our knife. We have our grafting rulers, we have our signs. So one thing I want to discuss with the PowerPoint is polarity. Polarity is important. Polarity is how it faces. So we do want to maintain polarity. We cannot graft this upside down. This is bad. And the reason why we can't do that is phloem will work in two directions. Xylem doesn't work and not go backwards in a tree for a live tree. So we have to maintain polarity. We know that this is the way it is. This is the tip. These are our axillary buds. We have our nodes. We have our inner nodes. So what we're working with is we're working with our inner nodes. Now, what I care about here, and then there's other ways, there's ways that you can graft a single bud. We're not going to do that today. We're going to kind of go with the old school full sign. We have our terminal. We have our axillaries. So what I'm going to do is this is 1 year's worth of growth. The tree had a pretty good year, even though we had a nasty drought in Newport this year. This is 1 year, and I can tell this is nice, good inner nodes, and then we come to this little cluster here, and we see last year's bud scales. This is where this bud was last year, and those are those scales. So, and normally when I do this, you know, I'm kind of a production guy, so it's usually pretty quick. I'm making my cuts, the sign goes in my mouth just so it doesn't dry out, because, you know, I'm trying to do a bunch of these, but I'm not going to do that for you guys. So if there's any professional nurserymen out there and they're giving me heck for it, I do have to teach this. So here's our sign. Here's our rootstock. I'm going to put this aside. This is our red-handed, flat, back, beveled knife, extremely sharp. You can I shaved my wrist with this earlier, make sure it was sharp, just so we know it's sharp. So to prep our sign, so we make a couple cuts, and before I even make any cuts, what I always tell people who are new at this is let's make the plan before we make any cuts. So we want to have, you know, I'm all about making this as easy as possible. So I don't like doing weird things unless I have to. So I want to make it so that everything lines up nice and tight. And there are certain ways that I graft this on that's going to create these gaps and whatnots that we don't want. So I always kind of plan to do it so I have some good contact. So I'm going to have this looking like this. So I've already got this plan in my head. So I have my knife, and I do use this as a knife. A lot of times when we're teaching people and they struggle, they're using it like a chisel. I never really sit down unless I'm in a high school or I'm grafting because my hands are going back and forth. So I make an angle cut. So that angle cut makes a nice little ramp that my flap's going to go onto. So then what I'll do is this bud is going to be in my way, and I don't really have a problem cutting off buds. So I want this to fit as best as possible. So I'll cut that off. So then I'll come here, and then I'll use the tip of my knife, and I'm literally just going to skin that. And it's okay if I do it more than once. I don't want to take too much off at once. And this would be where if I have my little diagrams, you can kind of see where the brown goes to the green, to the white, and vice versa, but I know it's going to be hard here. I'm going to flip it completely over 180 degrees. I'm going to make that same cut on the back. And if I have to do it again, I'm not worried. Okay, I literally just skinned it. So I have a wound back here. I have a wound up here. This is to adjust that flap. This little end cut right here is to get the flap. You know, we think of it as a ramp. So this is going to be where all my good contact happens. So I'll put that down over my mouth. I'm going to take my rootstock. Now, because this is an upright tree, I want to graft this as low as possible. I want this unit to be down as far as possible. This is an upright tree. If this was a leafing tree, I would want to do things a little bit differently because I might want to elevate it to get it up off the ground, and we have that nice. It actually looks like a tree instead of a shrub, even though it's a tree. But I'm going to do this as low as possible because the lower I put this, the lower it puts the graft union, and the less likely I'm going to have any little epicornic buds or dormant buds down here where it can become rootstock, become suckers. That's going to be a different tree. So this is the roundleaf European beech. This is straight Fagus sylvata. This is Fernleaf beech. Any buds that come off this are going to have round leaves. This is going to have those nice dissected leaves. So once I kind of plan where I'm going to make my cut, I'll come in here, and then I'll make that cut, and I'm always picking stuff up, I'm always holding it. When I make my cuts, I pull my knife through, you can see how I'm holding it. I always support the load. I know a lot of times beginners make is they're trying to cut like this, and they're scooping, and they're trying to cut, and it's moving around. Now, I always pick stuff up, I always support it. That's what makes it so I'm less likely to cut myself, as well as get nice clean cuts. So then I'll come in here, and then I come down with my knife. The flat part of the knife is against the stem. And I come, and I make my little flap. And then you see how that flap peels. That's why you like these knives. Because that bevel is pushing that little flap out. And you can, I don't know if you guys see it, but right here, we can really see where it differentiates between the bark and the white and the cambium and all that. So now, because I'm not doing this for production, I'll put the knife down. I get yelled at when I don't. So now what we do is we come and we line it up. And as I mentioned before, I don't stick it in the middle because I'm not lining anything up. This rootstock is definitely fatter than the scion. So I come in here, and that little angle causes that flap out there. And then I come here, and then I line it up. So I would hold it with that hand, but seeing as I'm trying to show you, everybody, how we do it, is you can see that this flap is going to line up on here. and these are going to make our contact. The fact that I can see bark to bark without any white, if I see white, then I know I don't have alignment, I might have air gaps, and so we don't want that. So I've lined up to one side. So I'm going to go back to, how I would normally do it, grab it, pinch it. So I always pinch it with my middle finger and my thumb. I take my grafting rubber, I always leave this finger free because this grabs my grafting rubber, and I have that there as kind of a little safety, and I always keep that empty. So what I do, and I always cut my rootstocks down so I can get it over the top. I wrap it once, I wrap it twice, I wrap over it. Now I can let go and I can look. If my graft has moved at all, now I can change it. I can kind of take my fingernail and move it from side to side, and then what I do is I come down and I wrap, and I wrap. And I always keep my finger here because if something happens, I can let go without losing it, because you let go of a rubber band when it's full and it just makes a mess. So then we'll wrap. I have them kind of touching. I don't worry about really, really tight wraps because I would normally put these in that humidity tent immediately. I can't do it because I'm in the office here. But this was in that humidity tent, now I keep it from drying out. So I'll come, and I never really wrap a lot. I always like to leave a little bit of a gap there because I don't really want to have any constriction below the graft, because I want to make sure I have really good sugar and water movement going on there. So then to finish it, I take my two fingers, I come up, over, grab, and then I'm done. So that is what a finished graft looks like. So this is all the tent as is. So when this takes, and I don't know for maybe about 2 or 3 weeks. But then I'll come in here and then I'll just cut that right off. But we're not going to do it because this is still good rootstock. And even though I made this move here, I can always go around. And this is another reason why kind of the New England, the Rhode Island nursery trade likes to do this. Is I can, if I screw that up, I can just flip it around on the other side and do it again this year or next year. So I think that's about all we really have time for this. I think we do want to have a little bit of a Q&A session. I'm running a little bit behind schedule, and I'm going to go sit back down again. So I think everything's turned on for me.
Thank you very much. Always fascinating. There is one question. Someone asks how old exactly those trees out front are. In fact, I can answer that question if I might. What's really funny, a few years ago, there was 3 beech trees out front, and some woman out from Florida calls out of the blue and says, I've got a portrait of a man who was one of the grandees of Newport in the early 19th century, and he was affiliated with the Redwood Library. So she sends the portrait. On the day it arrived, that 3rd beech tree had one giant branch come off and fall on the street and nearly kill someone. So we made the difficult decision to take it down. But Mr. Johnston is the man's name, and he owned all sorts of property in Jamaica and ended up living in Newport in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So that tree is, I worry about it. If anything happens, I feel like it's nearing the end of its life cycle. Is that not true? Or
I would be concerned, but that tree is probably one of the better, bigger trees out of all the old trees around town. So you can kind of judge if the tree's kind of getting a little old, because you look at the top, and if the top starts to thin out because it's the farthest from the root system, then that's kind of how you can gauge that things are. And the top of that tree is in still pretty good shape. I wouldn't be worried, And again, anything could happen. We could get a hurricane where the wind blows in the right direction and goodbye. But I really think it's one of the healthier.
That was a concern for a long time, and it took a while, but finally the the people from Bartlett Trees came, I think it was in just this past October, and climbed all up there and trimmed it, because indeed the top can get a bit too heavy and it really stresses out those branches. You know, as if I know anything about trees. So you know what? Maybe I'll just retreat and let you guys. But I'm just want everyone to know that I'm doing all that I can to make sure that the trees, you know, continue, because you know, the building itself looks very dour and, you know, neoclassic linearity, and people don't realize how green and lush the campus is. And so without those two trees, it'd be a real, you know, you look at the photographs of the Redwood Library on the web and it looks very, very dour. So I'm going to stop right there.
I have a question for Nick. The chains that are in that tree that you saw, were those chains put to keep the limbs from falling out? Or what would be the purpose for that? And do we do anything like that now?
Well, I suspect that somebody, and they've been there a while, and I suspect somebody was concerned about the two main leaders falling out. And it's, you know, with trees, you never want to wrap around the outside, but it's okay to drill into it, because the tree, you're not sacrificing all that cambium on the outside. So if you kind of drill into it, that's all fine. A lot of times people will try and put a cable in it and they'll wrap the cable around the outside. Well, that's kind of a death sentence, because in a couple of years you're going to strangle it. But by drilling into it, it's fine, and the tree literally just grows over it. If you look at that photo, you go look at the chain, you'll see that the tree is literally growing out over the chain, and that's fine. So I just found it kind of funny that I've never seen a chain. And people, you know, and others will use threaded rods for that all the time, which is fine. And who knows at some point why they decided to use a chain, because maybe the cables weren't really doing anything. But
It's fascinating. I wanted to also say I posted a link for those of you who are out there for a little bit of feedback for the Tree Conservancy, just about the presentation, and just if you're interested in getting onto our mailing list, the form is helpful for us to know how we did and what we're doing and what you think. So if anyone would fill that out, we would appreciate it.
And how do you explain that our tree seems in such better shape? Because, you know, I know of other people in town who had massive trees very similar to the one out front, and they're down. Ours somehow endures, and I'm just curious, is it just luck?
I don't know. It could be luck. It could be a lot of things that. And again, you know, just further down on Bellevue, I know of a few Fernleaf beeches where they're definitely on their way out because they've had to cut the tops out. And it is. I mean, trees get old. There's a lot of reasons why they might fail. I mean, there is that beech disease out there. It's a phytophthora, and it goes after the older trees. But you guys have done well taking care of the tree. You know, you kept the lawn mowers away and the weed eaters, and you got that nice thick mulch layer. It's not too thick where it's smothering things. And I think the fact that, you know, everybody likes that tree, everybody's kind of takes care of it. They look out for it. I did sampling with the interns last year, and we took a couple herbarium samples for pressings, and we got yelled at by like 6 different people driving by because we were taking little tiny pieces out of that tree. And it was really like I had to convince the interns to still work with us because everybody was really upset that we were touching that tree. So
I'm seeing a third question. Let's see. Are there any plans to sell the grafts in the future?
We're really trying to preserve them so that when the parent tree passes, we have a good specimen. That said, we do have, if we have a lot of them, a big number of them, we might give one to another site or sell one. But for the most part, we're really looking at this as historic preservation using horticulture. So in order for us to preserve these trees, the lineage of the trees, we need to make sure that we have enough of them. So it's possible. I wouldn't rule it out, and we have sold some in the past. But the most special ones we're really keeping to grow out and get as big as we can, so that, you know, it's not if the tree will pass, it's when. And so we really want to be prepared for that moment. And especially with a tree like the Fernleaf Beech at the Redwood, it's so sentimental to so many people that it'll be heartbreaking when it does finally go down. And we hope that we can provide a little bit of solace by providing that baby tree. I call it a baby, even though that's not right, but that's what I call them, to bring it.
We do have some parks with some historical significance that we really want to keep these trees in those parks for everybody to enjoy, first.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to thank you both and the Newport Tree Conservancy for this very fine presentation. I think people enjoyed it a lot. And we've got other things planned, right, Natasha, that we'll come up with new programs to discuss trees and the green environment of Newport, Rhode Island. In the meantime, I want to make everybody aware of the Music Appreciation Series by Dr. Marquardt, which will continue on April 14th when he'll be discussing the first part of Between the Wars. And as always, you can join and you can sign up for the lectures or the presentations on our website, and all of it's free of charge. And remember that also all of these presentations are archived on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Hi, bye.